Ravneet Gill of Yes Bank. Mr. Gill, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
No, pleasure to be here, Nikunj.
You're the man of the moment. So let's first break it for our viewers. In your opinion, in your words, what happened at the board meeting? Then I'll throw some questions at you.
So I think two things regarding the board meeting. I think somewhere the message got lost in semantics. The board meeting very clearly we deliberated what the options were on the table. The most advanced obviously was Citax. Given the fact that this was a preferential allotment, the board's considered view was that let's complete all the formalities before we give the final approval and make the preferential allotment, which I think from a process standpoint is exactly the right thing to do. And that is what the message was supposed to convey. I don't think that the message in any way conveys any uncertainty around this $500 million. All that it said was that we are considering this favorably and we will approve it. But I think the question really was that let's complete the overall formalities and the documentation before we go ahead and do that. So I feel very, very strongly certain about the 500 million being there. All our conversations with the investor have suggested that. The investor has, very clearly demonstrated to us through a lot of documentation in terms of, the availability of money, the fact that this investment is getting liquidated to be able to put into an escrow account for the final investment in Yes Bank. And also given the background of the investor, I personally think that, Reserve Bank of India will look at it very favorably.
The big question is that before the board meeting, when we spoke last, on 30th, you had indicated to the markets that you had in principle offers of $2 billion. There is no mention on the $1.2 billion bid of Arvind Singh Braich. You've said that the board is still considering it.
That's right.
So when you say board is still considering it, do you think there are some concerns which the board members have raised about the bid and the quality of the bid and from where it is originating? I think that's the biggest question. Why is the $1.2 billion bid still under consideration?
So, a couple of things. First and foremost, even if you saw the release that we made to the exchanges post the last board meeting, we have said that negotiations are on, which should get concluded shortly. The investor is domiciled in Canada, has businesses across the world, hasn't invested big numbers in India, and to that extent, there was a lot of due diligence that needed to get done. Both sides needed to be totally certain about, wanting to enter into this engagement. And given the fact that this was a multi-jurisdictional investor, we wanted to be completely sure that there was alignment of interests because this is not like a public markets investor coming in. If you are getting into a preferential allotment, I think the relationship that defines between the investor and the bank is of a completely different nature. I mean, the contours of that relationship are very different. So all that we want to do is that want to satisfy ourselves completely in every respect before taking a final call. And I think while I can understand the impatience of the market in this respect, I would much rather that we take a very considered, well thought through view on in the matter rather than do something in haste either way and then subsequently realize that maybe it was not the right decision to make.
Since this is a binding bid, I'm sure Arvind Singh Braich would have done his due diligence when you gave a binding bid. You have got this bid, I think the bid came to you by end of October.
That's it.
It's been a good 45 days after that.
Yes.
45 days is a long time at a time when there's an urgent need to raise capital.
Right.
Why is the due diligence process from your side taking so long, and what are the concerns the board members yesterday raised about this bid?
So, 45 days may look like a fairly long period. I mean, do bear in mind, Nikunj, that we want to raise capital very quickly. We understand that what the market's expectations in this regard are, the pressures that come with that. Question is that should we allow that to hurry us into a decision? At the end of the day, don't look at it in the context of a 45-day due diligence. Look at it in the context of a relationship then that which is there for a very long period of time, right? With potential board representation, etc. You would want that relationship to work well and to be sustainable. And I think if to be able to establish those principles, it takes a little bit of time. I would much rather do that than for either side to repent at leisure. So we have always maintained that any recommendation that we will make to the board will have to be very well diligenced. It will have to be very well thought through. Must make complete strategic and financial sense for the bank. And I think that's the process that is underway. So while I can understand in some respects the impatience of the market, and I apologize for that. Equally, I feel that these are decisions which can be life altering and should be very well thought through.
So if you have to let's say talk about the bid in terms of the status. Is it still work in progress, or you think it may actually not see light of the day given where your due diligence process is?
So I would say that
It's not off the table.
it's not off the table, and I think if it was off the table, I think the board would have very candidly mentioned that in yesterday's release. As it says, discussions are still on, and which is exactly the status. So we haven't been able to reach a conclusion on this particular
Why are you
bid.
not able to conclude?
As I mentioned to you that there is certain due diligence that is currently underway. There were certain representations, etc., that we needed, and as soon as those get fully addressed, we will be in a position to take a final decision.
In your board meeting, there was also mention of Rakesh Jhunjhunwala,
Yes.
a mention of GMR family office, Aditya Birla family office.
Yes.
In yesterday's board meeting, there was no mention of bidders and what is the status on those bids.
So, two things here. First and foremost, as far as the Indian family offices are concerned, we spoke with them and we said that potentially let this capital raise go ahead, and then in the next raise they could come in. That was a view that we shared with them, and I have to say they were very supportive and very understanding in the matter. The second is, as far as some of the institutional bids were concerned, I think those were conditional upon us raising a certain number in one shot. And given the fact that we were not raising that number in yesterday's board meeting, we thought it would be inappropriate to discuss those bids.
So are those bids off the table?
No, they are not off the table. I just think that once we have the numbers, overall number, which we talked about, I think then they will be back in play.
So what would you say is in the final lap? It's a $500 million bid which is in the final lap.
No, so I won't say that. So first and foremost, two things. If you see 500 in isolation, it's not a small number. Even 500 million will add 1.1% to our CET1. So it's not an insignificant number. And we have shown over the last couple of quarters the ability of the bank to be able to accrue capital organically. So that process will continue. We will continue to run the balance sheet in a very efficient fashion, while wanting to raise the full capital that we need and we require. But equally, Nikunj, what was also discussed in yesterday's board meeting were a couple of other offers, bids, expressions of interest that we are currently considering. And as any responsible board would be, we will be in a position to come out and disclose those to the market as soon as they become binding, and that process could be very short. So the single message that I would want to convey to the markets, to investors, to depositors, is that our fundraise is very much on track. We have a plan B, we have a plan C. It's just a question of the fact that we would want to disclose that in greater detail once we have binding bids on the table. But just the mere fact that we talked about 500 million in yesterday's board meeting should not in any way convey the impression that we are not trying to solve for a smaller size.
But the board understands the urgency of capital.
Yes.
Why board yesterday did not take a firm and a final decision on the $500 million bid?
So just to be able to put that into context, yesterday evening post the board meeting, the investor wrote to us saying that will be very shortly conveying to us the details of the escrow, and will be also going and approaching the Reserve Bank of India for their approval. So as you are aware, the process is that if there's an investor who's over 5% and which requires regulatory approval, then the bank doesn't approach the RBI on their behalf, they approach the Reserve Bank of India directly. So yesterday, immediately after the board meeting, the investor wrote to us thanking the board for favorable consideration of his bid, saying that they will very shortly be conveying the details around the escrow, and that they will be putting in the Reserve Bank of India application. I think that shows their preparedness and their commitment to this particular investment.
What is next? What should we expect from the next board meeting of Yes Bank?
So I think what you can expect from the next meeting of the board meeting of Yes Bank is much more clarity on the overall size of capital that we are raising, and potentially a closure of a couple of investment transactions.
So when should we expect the next board meeting?
So one of the things which I will say is that we got the timing of the board meeting yesterday wrong. The way matters were progressing, we thought that we will have all the procedures, etc., completed before the board meeting, which wasn't quite the case. And I admit to that, absolutely. So we don't want to just put ourselves in that bind, but the clear intention of the board, and which was also articulated in the board meeting yesterday, was that the board will meet ASAP and at very short notice as soon as we are ready to print.
Which means 2019 or early 2020?
No, very much so, 2019 itself.
So 2019, the next board meeting will happen, and in that board meeting, we will get a complete clarity
Yes.
on how much capital you are raising.
Absolutely, and I will again say this at the cost of repetition, Nikunj, that I think yesterday some of the messaging got lost in semantics, and I would just want the market's right level of restraint. Our capital raise is very much on track. The level of interest that we continue to get from very high quality investors is also very good. It's just that we are also very mindful that we should make those disclosures once we have full certainty around those.
But are you hinting at the fact that there are more family offices and PE funds which have expressed interest after your last board meeting?
Not only that, I think we have some very good institutional investors as well who have expressed interest, and with whom we are in fairly detailed negotiations.
How would you defend what's coming in social media for Ravneet Singh Braich? How would you defend that?
So, first and foremost, I'm not a big fan of social media. And the only reason, it's not because I'm not on social media, but because I personally believe that, you can
That's
get
age, sir. That's age.
I think it is a, no, I completely get the point around this being age. I think the interest around social media is understandable, and a lot of things get discussed over there as well. I completely get that. But to be fair, I think we should not be basing our judgment on social media alone. And also the fact that you should always give the chance to somebody to be able to defend themselves.
Okay. So what you're confirming to us is that before 31st of December 2019, before the year ends and before the world goes on Christmas
Yes.
and New Year holiday,
Yes.
you will raise capital.
Absolutely.
And the minimum would be $500 million?
So 500 is definitely on the table, but clearly I will again say this, that don't restrict it to that. That's the bare minimum, but we are confident that we'll raise a lot more than that.
If you're not able to raise $2 billion, which you had earlier communicated, how will your plans change?
So at the end of the day, what we need is really a growth capital, right? And when we are talking about the quantum eventually that we end up raising, I think if suppose we are not able to raise the full $2 billion, then I think we'll just need to moderate growth. But I think it's very important to understand that we have shown ability to be able to accrete capital organically in the past. There's no reason we can't do that on an ongoing basis. And if suppose the number is a little shy of 2 billion, then only thing that the only implication it has is that we will need to moderate the growth accordingly.
There was a buzz in the market that some individual investors and some family offices which originally had expressed interest as per your communication, they've backed out.
Not at all. I think I will like to make this point very, very emphatically that we were in discussion with each one of them. These are very long-standing relationships. These are people who are well-wishers of the bank, who are very committed to the bank, and we just told them that in this particular raise, let us go ahead with the investors that we have, the large investors that we have, and in the subsequent capital raise that we do, we would more than welcome their participation. I think the reaffirmation of their commitment, I don't think is an issue. It was very much discussion that we had with them and told them the reasons why we believe that this time we should go ahead with the larger investors, institutional investors, and in a subsequent raise we will definitely lean on them.
So you're confident that $500 million is coming from one source, from one individual account, and a group of family offices where you had indicated that they are ready to put in about $100 million approximately.
That's right.
So the capital raise would be 500 plus 100 bare minimum because none of your family offices and none of the individual investors are backed out?
No, so I think in one of the cases, I think there was also the condition that we would do a minimum size. And that participation was contingent on that size being met. Given the fact that in this particular case, we were just talking about the 500 million, so we just didn't think it was right to be, requesting that investor to participate.
In your last press release or last communication in November end, you'd also said that a large US fund is interested in putting about $100 million plus.
That's right.
What is the update on that?
So that is off the table, that very clearly. And again, I think also that discussion was hinging on a certain amount that we would look to raise. I think the moment we are able to put together that amount, which was discussed in terms of the minimum raise, I think that investor should also come back into the fold.
These are difficult times, and given where the stock is, you're sticking your neck out and you're committing to things. Are you confident? Are you certain?
So the thing is that what the point that needs to get appreciated is that we would not take something to the board where we didn't have a sense of comfort. We would not, or rather not recommend to the board. The very fact that the board has expressed willingness and being favorably disposed towards this particular bid should give you a sense, Nikunj, that we feel very certain about it.
Okay, we'll sound slightly repetitive with this one, but this is just for the benefit, because for those who've tuned in, we're getting a lot of Twitter questions as well. So I'm going to throw in some Twitter questions, but first let's recap your board meeting.
Yeah.
What you are indicating and communicating to our viewers and millions of your shareholders is that no large investor is off the table.
So nobody is off the table. That's absolutely right. And I think we have mentioned that the discussions are still on. I mean, if for instance any one of those offers was off the table, I think we would have very communicated it very clearly in the release to the exchanges yesterday.
In next 2 weeks, if you're not able to conclusively come up with a decision on the $1.2 billion bid, how will you communicate? Will you be communicating at the board meeting, or like last time when you got the binding bid, you communicated to the exchanges?
So we are in closure mode at this point in time as far as capital is concerned. So it is quite possible that we have a board meeting in very short order. Like I said, that maybe we got the timing of the last board meeting wrong. So we didn't want to bind ourselves to a date right now, but the very clear expression from the board was that we can meet at very short notice to close things out. And if, for instance, by then we have arrived at a decision which would indicate that we don't want to pursue this bid, I think we'll make that very clear in that particular meeting.
So what you are also indicating and communicating, and these are your words, that the board meeting will happen in this calendar year.
All I'm saying is that the board meeting could happen at a very short notice. The board is very flexible on this. And again, the only reason why we didn't want to put a date was, like I said, that yesterday we were hoping to accomplish a little more than we eventually ended up doing. And so we didn't want to, have that kind of thing, because it builds up expectations. And then obviously, there is a
timeline. This calendar year, early January.
We are very confident about December itself.
And before 31st December 2019, before we roll over to 2020, you're confident of giving good news to your shareholders that you got money in your kitty.
Yeah, so I think...
And the bare minimum would be $500 million.
So bare minimum is 500 million. We are hoping to be able to solve for a much larger number. And I would not even want to wait till 31st December. We'd like to share that good news with the investors and the supporters of the bank much earlier, hopefully.
What did you hear last from RBI?
So we've had lots of informal discussions with Reserve Bank of India. Like I repeatedly say, it's not for me to try and prejudge what RBI will eventually decide on any of these bids. On Citax, for instance, I feel, given the fact I'm talking about Citax because which has found favor with the board, RBI should feel very comfortable with the investor and the background of the investor. But in other discussions that we have with RBI, and again, like I said, without wanting to prejudge what they will say, we found them exceedingly accommodative. So my sense is that RBI will provide us all the accommodation that is needed when they arrive at a decision for any investor who's over 5%.
Citax, your due diligence is over.
It's done.
The board is convinced.
Yes,
It's
absolutely.
a matter of board meeting.
It's just a matter of completing of procedures, but the due diligence part is over.
That's very reassuring for your investors.
Right.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for patiently answering all our tough questions, and I'm sure markets would be reacting and watching this insight, and just to take things forward as to what your assurances are.
No, thank you, Nikunj, and I will just request the markets for a little bit of patience. Again, as I mentioned, that sometimes semantics have a role to play in all of this, but we feel very confident about a capital raise.
Thank you very much, and good luck, and have a great day ahead.